Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Endowment for the Arts webinar on making websites, videos, mobile apps, and video games accessible to all. We are pleased that you could join us for what is sure to be an informative presentation. My name is Beth Bienvenu, the Director of the National Endowment for the Arts Office of Accessibility. We are the advocacy and technical assistance arm of the Arts Endowment and work to make the arts accessible for people with disabilities, older adults, veterans, and people in correctional and healthcare settings. Today, we are pleased to share with you some approaches to making electronic media accessible to all audiences. Throughout the presentations, we will make reference to cultural organizations, but this information is relevant to all organizations that create or use these technologies. Organizations have long been aware of how to make their buildings and programs accessible through wheelchair ramps, sign language interpretation, closed and open captioning, audio description, and other modifications to physical spaces and programs. On the screen, we have some examples, including a photo of a curving ramp, a person using sign language, and an exhibit sign with Braille. But cultural organizations are using more and more new technologies, such as mobile applications or apps, video games, and websites to enhance user experiences, create art, share content, sell tickets, and create educational opportunities. On this screen, we have a photo of a Smithsonian exhibit of video games, featuring a woman looking at a projection of a video game, and a quote projected on the wall that says, "Games have so much freedom, you can go anywhere you want." And there's also a photo of a person holding a tablet computer. So just as a flight of stairs can pose a barrier to someone trying to enter a building, or the lack of captioning can pose a barrier to someone viewing a film, the features of a video game, mobile application, or inaccessible website can also pose a barrier to someone with hearing, vision, mobility, or cognitive disabilities. But there are many strategies that you can use to make these electronic systems accessible. And before we get to these strategies, I'd like to point out that the key is to plan for accessibility from the beginning. As you develop your program or as you design your technology, be sure to keep all users in mind. Our guests are here today to provide you with some valuable information on strategies for developing your electronic media to make information accessible for all audiences. So this information provided here will be fairly general, an overview on accessibility. To get into the technical details would take more than the hour we have, so we hope that this information will be useful to you as you design your programs and technologies. So I'm so pleased to have with us three experts. We have Larry Goldberg, Director of the Carl and Ruth Shapiro Family National Center for Accessible Media at WGBH, who will talk about website accessibility and video captioning. We will also have Mark Marley, the President and CEO of the AbleGamers Foundation, and Johnny Richardson, the Industry Outreach Coordinator for the AbleGamers Foundation, who will both talk about accessibility for mobile apps and video games. Before we move on, there are a few housekeeping notes. You are all muted and will only be able to hear us. We will give a 50-minute presentation followed by 10 minutes for questions. You can submit questions or comments at any time using the question and answer box below the PowerPoint. We will do our best to address as many as possible during the time we have. And please don't use the raise hand button. This webinar will be archived, and we will make the links and resources that we use available on our site when it's posted. So be sure to send in your questions, and we will go ahead with Larry Goldberg.
Thank you, Beth. It's great to be here today, great to be asked to be part of this really good group. I, as Beth said, are from the WGBH National Center for Accessible Media, and that's in Boston, part of public broadcasting in Boston. Officially, we are the Carl and Ruth Shapiro Family National Center for Accessible Media, and we're an outgrowth of the history of accessible media here at WGBH, which began in 1972. And for those of you who might encounter this question on Jeopardy, the first caption program ever was Julia Child's French Chef, and that was open captioned, and I'm showing an example of what that looked like back in 1972. Picture of Julia saying, "The first stew is dark, it's cooked in red wine." And from that point forward, captioning has grown tremendously. It became closed captioned, and I'll explain more about that later. But our second forward movement in the field of accessible media was in 1973, when we founded a descriptive video service, or DVS. This is a service for blind and visually impaired people which provides added descriptions of television and movies, 1993 that is, for TV shows where we provided an added track in between the dialogue in a movie. The first program we ever described on television was American Playhouse's Lemon Sky. And I think that might have actually been funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, so it all comes full circle. I have an image of Lemon Sky on the screen here, starring Kevin Bacon and Kira Sedgwick, so we are only 1 degree separated from Kevin Bacon. Most of you know what closed captioning looks like. You've seen it many, many times. Maybe video description is a little less familiar. But rather than trying to stream a video over this webinar, I've provided some links to examples online, a clip from The Lion King on our website, and Horton Hears a Who. There's also a large collection of DVDs with descriptions on an extra audio track, and that includes entertainment videos as well as Nova and Frontline and American Experience. So you can see that at the link also, and all of those links will be available, as Beth said, after the webinar. You can download them yourself. The third leg of what WGBH has done in the field of media access was the creation of the National Center for Accessible Media in 1993. And our first R&D project in this group was the development of a system for closed captioning in movie theaters. NCAM was founded because we realized there was a lot more media that needed accessibility than television. Or even VHS tapes at the time. So we began many projects, and we created initially Rear Window, which is a system for creating captions in movie theaters, so only the person who wants to see the captions would. And from there, we moved into online and mobile media for captioning and video description, in-flight entertainment, electronic books and online learning, figuring out ways to make menus on DVDs and televisions talk to you. And throughout all of this, we were working on the standards and policies and laws that promoted all of these various services that are now becoming even more and more common, and we're really happy to see that. And we'll talk about the latest a little bit later. Now, luckily, I think this question on the next slide, why design accessible websites, is becoming less and less common. It's almost becoming a rhetorical question. But some people are still coming to this for the first time, and so I'll talk about 3 imperatives for why designing an accessible website. One is the social imperative. I think most of us on the phone today are public serving institutions, either nonprofits or recipients of federal grants or taxpayer funds. And our mandate is to make everything we do accessible to the widest possible audience, and making your website available to everyone is really primary these days. There's also a legal imperative. There are legal requirements if you are receiving funds from the federal government through the federal procurement rules of Section 508. There are standards to follow, as well as the W3C standards. And the Justice Department has released a notice of proposed rulemaking that could, in fact, require all websites to be accessible, and we're awaiting that action probably in the next 6 months. And finally, there's the educational imperative. Those of us who are providing information for students, whether it's K-12, post-secondary, or beyond, we have the requirement to make sure as many students as possible are served. And when your materials, whether on the web or physical or in your public space, are accessible, you'll be helping those students. And in fact, some educational institutions actually require their materials to be accessible in all venues, including online learning and digital books. So for those of you who haven't experienced how people with disabilities actually access websites and software and games you'll hear in a little bit, the sort of generic term is assistive technologies. These are hardware and software products that are either built into your operating system on your computer, and that includes Windows and OS 10, iPhone's iOS, and that's iPhone and iPads, or the Android system. There are both built-in and add-on technologies for all those platforms. For people who are blind or visually impaired, there are screen readers. This is software that will read out loud any text that's on the screen. And some of those products are known as JAWS or Window Eyes. There's an open source one called NVDA, and built right into the Mac operating system is VoiceOver. There's software that will magnify what's on screen, known as Zoom Text or Magic or Zoom. And for people with mobility impairments, there are ways of connecting a single switch. If you can only move one limb or one finger or even just your eyes, there are things known as head sticks or eye gaze software. You can use your breath to control your computer. All of these are actually common assistive technologies that have been available for many years. Many of us know about how you can dictate to your computer or your mobile device and control it. And many of us know of Dragon Naturally Speaking from the Nuance Corporation, which can not only take dictation, but can actually control your computer and have it do things that you talk to. Though not normally known as an assistive technology, closed captions, sign language, video description, those can be provided in technological ways as well on websites, and they are actually widely available on websites. The question as to how to design an accessible website is both simple and complicated. I won't try to get into a major tutorial on how to design an accessible website today. I'll give some basic highlights. But for those of you who really are ready to dig in or want some of the information about that, the World Wide Web Consortium's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are in version 2.0. They are referred to as WCAG. And the link is there for you to look more deeply into those guidelines. In addition, the U.S. Access Board is matching those standards pretty closely with their own, and you can see their guidelines on the Section 508 website. And the new rules are due to be expanded by the end of 2013. They're known as a refresh of the rules, and they will be updated for more modern digital technologies. The basics of web accessibility I can give in a few bullets, though it does get more deep and complex. But imagine using your computer or your device without a mouse or a monitor. That's the essence of what you need to do to make your website or technology accessible. It includes such things as text equivalents or alt text for any image on screen, that you use proper headings for page navigation, ways to skip around rapidly, skipping repetitive links. Any of your forms need to be labeled just right, so someone who has a disability can really use that same form like anyone else. And of course, websites have significant multimedia these days, both video and audio, and those can be made accessible through captioning and description online. The focus of your controls on your website need to be visible and independent by devices. You've probably heard of the term responsive design, that your website works on any platform, no matter how big or small or portable or fixed. And designing for device independence is key for accessibility. And a fairly straightforward one, maybe it's one that should even be first, is making sure that your website has a sufficient contrast between foreground and background. People often miss that. I have to say, even the beautifully designed websites at WGBH often miss the contrast issue. Now, to move on to video accessibility, in particular, we'll start with closed captions or open and closed captions. Sometimes these terms are mixed up. There's a variety of ways of defining them, but pretty well accepted is that open captions are captions that are burned into or permanently a part of your images, your film or your video, and closed captions are those that you can turn on and off at user control, like on television, but that's also common on websites. People often mix up the difference between subtitles and closed captions, but in this country, subtitles are generally used to translate from one language to another. So your audio may be in English, your subtitles would be in French or Spanish or Korean. Captions are specifically designed for deaf and hard of hearing people and include non-speech information such as sound effects and lyrics to songs and speaker IDs. So that's how we distinguish between subtitles and captions. There are a variety of formats, technical formats for broadcasting, for web and mobile environments. That information is available in a number of the links that I'm providing at the end of this presentation. and they're becoming more unified, so there is becoming a more universal standard for each of these environments and are being proliferated widely. And that's not just on the web, but actually in physical spaces like in theaters and museums and visitor centers. You will find both open and closed captions throughout those environments. For video description, you will run into similar issues. Video description is sometimes known as audio description or descriptive narration, depending on where you're coming from, both in terms of country and in terms of when you got into the game, and can be either open or closed. That is, you can record your description so that everyone hears it, whether they want to or not, or you can give the user control so they can open and close that description for their own desires. Description can also be used on videos, television, DVDs, on websites, on mobile devices as well, though isn't less common, much less common in those environments. But you'll also hear video description in theaters, live and movie theaters, in museums describing art and exhibits, at visitor centers at national parks and other places like that. And in all of those environments, focus is given to both dynamic images like video, as well as still images where it's an important graphic that needs to be described as well. Much of the change in the world of media accessibility happened because of the passage of the 21st Century Video and Communications Accessibility Act, or the CVAA, signed into law by President Obama in October of 2010, and rapidly the regulations began rolling out by the FCC. And that has an effect on captioning on the web, on video description on television, on the provision of captioning description to users, and even soon requirements about talking menus on video programming devices, as well as emergency information that's provided in those environments. I skipped over this rapidly, but there's a lot more information available about the CVAA and everything I talked about today at these links. These are links to documents, white papers, and resources on NCAM's website, as well as information for FCC-regulated entities at the FCC Disability Rights Office. The World Wide Web Consortium and Access Board, there are links there that have very important, valuable information. The Smithsonian has been deeply involved in accessibility in all of their museums for many years and have tremendous resources, as does the National Park Service. Their accessibility site from Harper's Ferry has a tremendous amount of resources that I really recommend for all of you as well. And here's my contact information. You can get in touch with me if you have specific questions, and we'll see how we might be able to help. For those who need a little help right now, my email address is larry_goldberg@wgbh.org. And I look forward to hearing from Mark and Johnny for the rest of the show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Larry. I just want to repeat that the web links that he posted will be available on the website when this webinar is archived. So you don't have to worry about not being able to get those at the moment. But thank you again. This was very important information. Websites have been around for a while and videos for even longer. So there's been a lot of guidance and some great examples of access with both of these technologies. But video games and mobile apps are newer, and the platforms and technologies are constantly shifting, which poses an additional challenge for accessibility. So we are pleased to have with us Mark Marley and Johnny Richardson from the AbleGamers Foundation to help provide some solutions. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
My name is Mark Marley, and I just want to give you guys a quick who I am. I've been in the software business for about 20 years. I'm the president and founder of the AbleGamers Foundation. I'm the winner of the 2012 American Association for People with Disabilities Hearn Leadership Award. And something I'm very proud of is the includification document, which is linked at the end of this presentation, which has a lot of the basis for what we're going to be talking about. Johnny and I just won the Multiple Sclerosis Society's Da Vinci Award last month, which is kind of a big deal because it's the first time a concept in a document had ever been nominated, much less won. I'm joined today by one of my greatest friends, Johnny. Johnny, please tell us a little bit about who you are as well.
Sure, thank you, Mark. So my name is Johnny Richardson, and I am a games and web media developer here in Boston. I have about 10 years of experience in both, as I said, games on the web, but I've also done a lot of stuff with mobile devices. I'm currently the lead user interface engineer at Disruptor Beam, which is a social gaming company here in Boston. And I'm also the Director of Industry Outreach for AbleGamers, and I work with hundreds of developers around the world as to how to make their software more accessible. As a disabled developer and gamer and user applications, I consider my mission and specialty to make games and software more accessible.
So who is the AbleGamers Foundation? We just wanted to tell everyone a little bit about us and why we've come to this. We're a charity that's based out of Harper's Ferry, which is interesting, that was just alluded to by Larry, that was founded in 2004 because I am a person with disabilities myself. I'm a veteran that has a disability, and my best friend has multiple sclerosis, and gaming was an important way for us to stay connected. And we had found that her disability was taking away her ability to game. We were looking for some information on how to make sure she could game better, and this is way back in the early days of 2004. And we were not really finding any information. So given that I had a technology background and I had a real desire to make a change, the AbleGamers Foundation was born. We mainly work in 3 different areas. Like this very presentation, we work with developers to educate them on how to make their games and products more accessible. We created a community of gamers with disabilities so that gamers could help gamers through the thoughts of crowdsourcing and the fact that while everyone's disability is slightly different, collectively we can always come up with solutions. And then when our financing allows, we provide AT grants for people with disabilities so that they can bring some of the assistive technology that allows them to play games into the home. So that's really our 3 main focuses. So what is game accessibility? Well, game accessibility really in a broad sense is making sure that everyone has access to the content that you're providing, be it games or mobile apps. But for this top conversation, we're going to talk specifically about making sure that your games are accessible to people with disabilities. You guys are going to work really hard on projects, or you're currently working hard on a project right now. Let's make sure that everyone is able to really enjoy what you're working on.
So more broadly for this presentation, we're talking about the extent of a disabled user's ability to fully use your application or game. For our purposes today is that we're going to cover more high-level stuff, as Beth alluded to earlier on today. We're not really going to delve into the technical aspects because that is a whole ball of wax that would take many, many hours to describe. And last but not least, today we're going to focus on native apps. What I mean by native is that it is an app that you actually go to, say, the Apple App Store or the Android Marketplace, and you download the application to your phone. This is as opposed to an application that exists only on the web, which is a whole different set of standards, and something that kind of ties into what we talked about, we're going to be talking about, but is a little bit outside of the scope. So why is this important? Well, obviously mobile devices are ubiquitous, and everyone uses one every day, at least every day, probably multiple times a day. You cannot assume every user of a mobile device is totally able-bodied and possesses all of their mental faculties. And in my opinion, frankly, mobile app accessibility compared to what we see on the desktop or the web is quite simple. So what is mobile accessibility? A lot of the concepts that we're going to talk about you can borrow from desktop software design, but there are actually a few fairly important differences. Namely, iOS and Android have a lot of built-in features that can do roughly 50 to 75% of the work as long as the developers that you're working with are capable, and I hope they are, which has never really been true for the desktop, just because the desktop has been such a fragmented and diverse array of technology. And as I said, the fragmentation of these devices is a little bit lighter than when we look at desktops. That's obviously less true for Android, given that it's on so many different handsets, but that's starting to change.
So who are our users? And the first step is really identifying who's going to be using the technologies you're going to develop. They're likely to live with some of the following impairments that I think we're all familiar with: mobility, cognitive, sight, learning disabilities. Now, what you might not be familiar with is some of the technology that they're using, stuff like screen readers, the need for subtitles, even Braille keyboards. And what is the age? And we kind of called the age out because one of the really interesting statistics that's come out of some of the big marketing firms, that there's actually more gamers over the age of 50 than there are under the age of 18. And I know that a lot of people might find that kind of shocking, but you have a retired population. They've got their grandkids on Facebook. Their kids are showing them how to play Facebook games. They've got iPhones now, or Android apps, or an iPad. I just went out and helped my neighbor who's 74 buy an iPad, and she's constantly telling me about games she's found. But the interesting thing is, as we age, we all know the need for different types of assistive technology become a little bit greater, hearing losses, eyesight losses. So really, a lot of this accessibility that we're going to be talking about is not really an option anymore if you want a wider adoption of what you're going to be working on. It's really a requirement.
So one of the other first steps to look at when you're building a accessible app or game is what devices do you want to target? Because when you're building something that's going to be on every major handset or mobile or tablet device available, it's going to greatly impact how you design your application or game. Because all of the operating system vendors have their own sort of what they call user interface guidelines. These vary based on brand implications, as well as how the phone or tablet is designed and things like that. So that's a lot to keep in mind. Users have different expectations based on the kind of device they're using as well. And then when you transition from desktop, many of you have probably built desktop software before, but this might be your first mobile application. Touch has very little in common with mouse and keyboard input, and disabled users generally just don't have as many input options as they have traditionally had on desktop computers. And they also desire much more piecemeal presentation. These applications can't be necessarily as complex because they won't be easy to use at all. And you also can't assume where the user is using the application. Traditionally, on the desktop, it's done mostly at home or the office. With a mobile device, it can literally be anywhere.
So let's talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts for mobile devices. I think that, this is really good to kind of set the frame for everything. Do simplify whatever makes sense. There's a tendency in the desktop environment, because of the amount of real estate and everything that you have, that you can, for lack of a better word, overcomplicate things. You don't really have that luxury in the mobile environment. Do put yourself in the user's shoes, and I think this is something that a lot of us should do. There's a lot of technology built into your mobile device for people with disabilities. Turn it on, live with it for a day or two, which leads right into our next one, which is use the features yourself. I've had friends who are fascinated that VoiceOver on their iPhone and what it can do. And so I think it really kind of helps you guys approach development if you kind of use some of this technology yourself. Do keep in mind that not to necessarily use fancy animations just for the sake of using them. Use animations where they make a lot of sense, and kind of leave them out if you're just adding them for just, wow, look what I found my computer can do. And as a person who is a quality assurance engineer, test, test, test. Now, some of the don'ts. Don't use over colorization. we'll talk a little bit later on in the presentation about some of the impairments that we're going to have to help overcome. One of the big ones, especially among males, is colorblindness and things like that. Represent any or repress any accessibility features. There's some people out there that actually have flagged their application not to allow certain technologies like VoiceOver to work. Don't do that. And turn accessibility into a complex. Don't turn accessibility into a complex problem. I've told hundreds and hundreds and thousands of developers, and Johnny would agree, that if you think about accessibility from day one, accessibility is not that hard. So the first group we're going to talk about is the visually impaired gamer and user. So the high-level concepts of a visually impaired gamer is a visually impaired gamer is sighted, but corrected visual acuity is only 20/60. They will seek and use accessibility features, especially text resizing, contrast settings, making things light versus dark or dark versus light, colorblind overlays, and sometimes voiceover technology. For the conversation that we're going to have, I do want to say that we're going to address mainly the needs of a visually impaired gamer, which is different than the blind gamer or the blind user. There has been a couple of examples of visual video games that have blind accessibility features to them, but for the most part, in my experience, to do either one of them well, the other one sometimes gets left out.
So what are some of the concepts that you can use that are going to make your application or game more accessible to visually impaired players and users? First of all, colorblindness and color impairment is a major and frequent disability that we come across all the time. So you really have to use high contrast colors. Otherwise, a lot of the visual accessibility of your app will not be there. Also, make sure to add voiceover and text-to-speech options wherever it makes sense, because as we said at the start, these devices tend to have pretty excellent voiceover controls and text-to-speech readers. And then don't add any overlays that are going to make it hard for a colorblind user to see something that's going to be behind it. Beware of things like transparency and opacity, because those can make parts of your user interface difficult to use for somebody that's got colorblindness or some kind of other impairment. Also, make sure that you add alternate text and alternate colors, like high contrast modes, to allow screen readers to A, call out any images that are on the screen, and B, to allow somebody to be able to alter the color of the application itself.
Yeah, one of the biggest examples that I use for people when I talk about this is we're all familiar with like red-green, and red might be what the enemy has and green might be what you have if you're playing some kind of like risk game or strategio game. But if you're red-green colorblind, you can't tell where your boundaries end and where the other boundaries begin. So you could use something like alternate colors, orange-blue as another option, or even symbols that go along with the color. So that's a real good example of what we're talking about here. The next group we're going to talk about is the hearing-impaired user. They're looking for at least closed captioning, but in order to really enjoy a game, full captioning is needed. And Johnny will talk about a little bit about what full captioning is. They're looking for visual cues about progress in a game that has been made, not just an audio cue. So, if a game says, quest advanced, and there isn't something on the screen that showed them that as well, they might be missing the fact that quest has advanced.
So on that topic, first of closed captioning, you're going to want to be careful not to link to any videos or contain any videos in your app that you don't have any subtitles. Also, you're going to want to refrain from any cues or events like notifications that don't have some kind of visual component. In fact, I always recommend both a visual and a haptic component. So in other words, vibration and the visual effect as well as audio, that's really what you need to hit. back to the captioning really quick because it's actually kind of a pet peeve of mine. If you have a lot of text in your application, your developer is putting that text somewhere in the app. So frankly, to include it as a caption somewhere really isn't that much work because it's not as if it's not already present somewhere internally inside of the application. That's honestly one of the biggest ROI points that I know of for applications and games.
One of the other returns on investments that captioning allows you to do is something called internationalization, because if you're going through the effort to put closed captioning in, then later on down the road when you guys are successful and you want to move your application to another country, you can replace the closed captioning that you guys already built in with French, and now you can, move your application into other areas of the world, and you already have the subtitle feature built in, which I think is kind of cool. The next one we're going to talk about is mobilely impaired gamers. This is one that's near and dear to my heart because I'm a mobilely impaired individual. They're looking for options to change how the game is controlled. They may want to change the speed of the game so that they can better react if their disability doesn't give them, a very quick reflex time. And this is a big note. Desktop mobility issues are very different than that in the mobile space. The USB port is an open source, and there are probably enough things to plug into the computer to fill up an 18-wheeler truck. That's not the same in the mobility world.
So along these lines of mobility and physical limitations, you really want to avoid in your game, especially any interface elements that require a lot of rapid movement. One of the pet peeves for me is the use of what are called QuickTime events in games these days, where you really have to press something or touch something in a very rapid manner in order to progress. That can really pretty much cut the app off, the app or the game off, or whoever your user is. So really either don't do that or leave the option of bypassing those kinds of events. You also really want to avoid using small buttons, which can be difficult on the mobile app because you've got a smaller screen. But remember that people really don't mind scrolling. They do mind it, though, if they can't touch the button. You're going to want to use a consistent navigation structure, which actually isn't that hard if you follow the guidelines of the device that you're building for. Whenever possible, and this can sound a little bit crazy because in marketing, everyone says how great MultiTouch is. But really, you want to avoid that because, frankly, for even able-bodied people, MultiTouch can be fairly difficult because what it does is it limits your movement. It limits your ability to get the control over the app that you want. Honestly, one button touch, one finger input is all you need in 99% of the situations that you're going to find yourself facing in your design. So please keep that in mind. So let's say you've got a zoom gesture where you're allowing the player to zoom the camera into the character by using the traditional two-finger zoom gesture. What I would actually do is also add a button, just zoom in, zoom out, that allows the same thing to happen. You could even add an option in the options menu to show or hide the buttons. What this does is it allows both able-bodied users and non-able-bodied users the same ability in the app, but it also doesn't force anyone to use one or the other. You should also offer tilt. Most devices these days have devices inside them that allow support for tilt, and it's very easy to access those devices within code. So there's really no reason that you can't use that as well. And that can be very effective for somebody who, say, doesn't have a lot of fine motor, but their gross motor allows them to, say, hold an iPad and then just tilt it back and forth.
And to that point, I actually prefer touch because the way I use my mobile device is I often just set it flat on a desk or something like that. So tilt is something that kind of irritates me. So, offering both is a really good way of covering and making sure everyone can enjoy it. We're going to move on to our cognitive and learning impaired users. some of the high-level concepts is they're looking for sandbox, consequence-free modes for a game. They're really wanting to learn how to play the game before they enter into any type of competitive mode. They may want or need save points. They're looking for fail-safes so that they can progress. This refers back to the quick time events that Johnny had talked about earlier. If they're not able to get through a quick time event, a game should be able to say, hey, do you need to move past this? And pausing the game so that they can plan their next steps is something that's real important.
So what are some other strategies that you can use for these kinds of disabilities? The first one is to avoid a long list of content. Say you've got an app that's mostly text. You'd be surprised how many apps out there will literally just show you a gigantic list. Even for me, I have no learning disabilities. It makes it very hard to navigate the app because it's easy to lose your place where you are. So I really recommend splitting that content up into pages, providing some kind of table of contents. That's just really the way you should do that if you've got a lot of text. You really would be surprised how many people leave out any kind of tutorial mode in their game and their app. A lot of games will just drop you into the game and assume you know what to do. You really want to spend a lot of time at the start of your development and your design thinking about how do you want to teach the player how to play or how to use your app. These can be very concise things, little tool tips. Even some kind of voiceover is ideal. And it allows the person with, say, a learning disability to really grasp what your app or your game is about and how to use it. And I would encourage everybody here to look at the most popular apps that are on the platform that you're targeting. So the App Lab Store has a ton of games on them, but week to week you can find 2 or 3 that are just, high up the charts. I look at those because there's a reason that people like them. And I'm not asking you to steal anyone's ideas, but what I'm saying is that if a lot of people like something a lot, it tends to be because that thing is designed very well. And I'd really, and there are lots of common threads between those that they probably hit that makes it so popular. I encourage people just to take a look at what's out there and learn from those. Last but not least, so when your app has push notifications, make sure they're descriptive, but try to keep them short. A lot of apps these days like to get the attention of the user by showing them a lot of information about what's going on. Say it's a news application that's pushing an entire story essentially into the notifications area. You really don't want to do that. Really try to get the subject or the title of whatever the notification is to be pretty darn short. You should also try to look at all of these groups of disabilities because they all share a lot of commonalities that you just want to try to hit on. So I always tell developers to try to minimize the need for form elements in the app or game that require input. This is because even with voiceover and keyboard support, a lot of mobile devices still are harder than desktop has ever been to input into text fields for a variety of reasons. So what you might want to do is say you need the user's information about, their name and their email address, tie into things like the Facebook SDK, because all that requires is that they touch Facebook Connect and suddenly you've got all of that information. That's a really easy way to avoid a lot of registration forms. You should avoid interface components that are temporary or that fade out after a period of time. So you'll see this a lot in games where, an enemy hits you, for example, and you've been damaged, and it stays you up for 3 or 4 seconds, and then that notification disappears. You really want to avoid that because not everybody is going to be able to realize A or B, read the notification within that time frame. So always provide some kind of OK button or close button. going back to what I said earlier about descriptive text and alternate text for graphics, I would advise that that is avoided for things that are purely decoration. So graphics that actually don't have any meaning to the user, they're just there to make it look good for somebody who's fully sighted, you want to avoid alternate text, because what will happen is the speech reader will interpret those graphics as important to the user, and it's easy to get confused. So that's the last point there. The one other point that I really want to hit on, and this is actually pretty important in my mind, is the differences in accessibility on the different platforms. iOS does a fantastic job. They have a bevy of features, but Android is taking some time to catch up. It's going to get there soon. Google has made an effort to get better with what they do, but honestly right now, both from a user's and developer standpoint, iOS is much easier. I'm not dissuading anyone from using either. I'm just saying that these are things that you need to think about when you're developing for those platforms. And continuing on, when we look at things like BlackBerry and Windows Phone, those are also quite behind in this area. They will get better, possibly over time, but currently they lag badly in accessibility, and a lot of disabled users have actually moved on to things like Android and iOS. So I would just, again, I don't want to discourage anybody from using BlackBerry, Windows Phone, or Android, or iOS. I just want everybody here to be aware of what they're getting into with these devices.
So quality assurance is something that I work on, that I near and dear. When it comes to accessibility, there is simply nothing more valuable than focusing on testing. There's still that typo of that O there, but that's okay. Try using your app with various features, and again, I think this is a point I can't stress enough. As content makers, it's important that you understand the capabilities of the tools in your hand, and the best way to understand that capability is to use that capability, even if you don't necessarily need it, because you'll understand exactly how it works and how your user is going to perceive your application. You will always learn more by several orders of magnitude via observing your user actions while you're with the app. This is, again, to testing, find a good beta group, find people that are going to give you real and honest feedback. Make sure people with disabilities are represented in that beta group so that you can get a real, good understanding of how people are going to be using your app. This means we're just about out of time. I think that if I'm looking at my clock, we have about 1 minute left. My name is Mark Barley. My contact information is right here. You can tweet me, you can call me, or you can LinkedIn me.
Same with
Johnny.
me. My name is Johnny Richardson, and you're all welcome, more than welcome, to send any questions our way, or give us a call, or tweet at us. You can find the AbleGamers Twitter account and Facebook link, as well as the link to our includification guide, which is includification.com, which is our 40-page full-color guide that demonstrates to developers how to accomplish many of these aspects that we talked about today.
Can't have gamification without includification. Thank you guys very much.
Great, thank you so much. That was a lot of great, valuable information, and this is an important topic. And I really appreciate both of you and Larry providing all this wonderful information. I hope that you have all learned some strategies for approaching access with these technologies, and will be sure to take advantage of the resources that are available. So we will all we'll open up to questions now, and I encourage you to email your question, or to send your questions to us using the Q&A box. We have about 10 minutes, so please send your questions, and we have a few already. So let's see, we'll start with, this is a question for Johnny or Mark. You said to simplify, quote, where it makes sense when it comes to an app or video game design. Where might it not make sense? What types of situations?
So in my mind, there are plenty of situations out there, in games especially, where there's, frankly, a lot of games get so complex just because of the genre of the game, or the story of the game, or just the goal of the game, where it's very hard to say, okay, if I simplify this design, it's going to compromise the game so much that it's almost not worth it. But what I'm not trying to say is that you shouldn't try. I'm saying that if you can simplify something for some reason, if you think that that's going to compromise the quality of the product, I would still encourage anyone out there to then look at that design and say, okay, if I can't simplify this, how do I explain it in a better way? Or how do I break the design up into more digestible chunks? And I guess that's an example of where you would not be able to necessarily, streamline something, but you can diversify the way that it's put out there into the user's vocabulary, essentially.
Okay, great, thank you. We have another question. This one is probably good for Larry. What tools are available to enhance accessibility, like say for captioning and description authoring, web accessibility checking, et cetera? What are some tools available out there?
Well, that's a good question. There are a range of tools. Let's start with captioning. There's everything from freeware, like a tool called Magpie, M-A-G-P-I-E, that WGBH's NCAM created a few years ago and makes available for free from our website. There are middle range tools from, for instance, a company called CPC, workstations for both Mac and PC to do your own captioning. And then at the very high end, broadcasters and television facilities will use a captioning workstation called Softel Swift. Those are the range of tools there. There's also ways of posting your video on YouTube, having the speech recognition engine there do, in essence, a rough draft. It won't be highly accurate. You can then take that text that is generated, download it, correct it, clean it up, and then re-upload it, and then you can have a captioned video on YouTube, which works pretty well. Not quite as many tools available for video description, except, in fact, video description is really just a script writer, script writing tool. You can write your script in Word, and the real issue then is the timing. Make sure that if you're watching a video, you can measure the spaces where there's time for dialogue. There's courses you can take on video description, and you can learn a bit about how to do it for your own institution. And then you just do a mix. It's really not more complicated than going into a mix room and mixing your audio. For web accessibility, you start with the guidelines that I pointed out in the webinar, and then there are various evaluation tools, little plugins or links you can put in your website, in your web page, and it will do a web evaluation. And the available web accessibility evaluation tools are listed at the W3C's Web Access Initiative site on their website. You can find eval tools there.
Okay, great, thank you. We got a question on when the presentations will be available, will be archived on our website. It'll be in the next couple of weeks. But you can go ahead and email any of us any of the questions that you have if you would like to get any of those links ahead of time. So we have another question, and I'm not sure who's best to answer this, but I'll throw it out there. How accessible are PDF files for screen readers, and if not, how can they be made accessible?
I can answer that question. Adobe actually has a pretty good suite of accessibility tools when you're doing a PDF creation. PDFs have to be created from something else, and it's very similar to web design. There are places for you to put alternate text, labeling, and the whole 9 yards. So, I just actually finished a project doing some PDF accessibility, and it's almost identical to what web accessibility looks like.
Great, thank you. Another question is, what are some programs that you would recommend for adding audio descriptions to videos? This is probably a good question for Larry.
So the question is, what programs?
Or are there
Do you
any
mean
tools out there?
software programs or? Well, there is one from the same company that makes the captioning workstation. Softail also has an audio description tool. As I mentioned, it really is just a question of writing out a script and timing the pauses. So you really can use any scripting tool. And even, as I said, Word. We started using HyperCard stacks way back in the old days. We created our own tool internally called Descriptor. But really what it does is time out the audio of a program and then measure the pauses. Aside from those two, that's the main. Actually, Magpie will do audio description. It's a little bit more tedious, but it's free, so you get what you pay for. Again, you can try that out from NCAM's website at ncam.wgbh.org. It's right on the homepage there. There's a link to Magpie.
Great, thank you. Another question is, are there centers or groups or listservs or anything that offer to do user testing for apps focusing on accessibility?
Yeah, I guess there's a follow-up question is, are you wanting to pay for it or not? Absolutely, there are organizations that will do all the accessibility testing in the world if you have the budget for it. If you're an organization like the AbleGamers Foundation, and we're looking specifically at games, we have had and we do have a small group of gamers with disabilities who would love an opportunity, especially if it's a really awesome title, to get into your system early and give you feedback. Larry, would you agree?
Yeah, it's a range. As Mark mentions, there are some free tools available, and then there are organizations like my own. NCAM actually does quite a bit of web accessibility work for our partners and corporate clients. We also have a free, what's called a favelet, something you can put in your bookmarks bar, the NCAM QA favelet. There's something called the Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool, WAVE. Jim Thatcher, an expert in the field, has his favelets you can put in your toolbar. So there's some pretty simple toolbar techniques, and they will get you some basic problems that you can fix by yourself right away. And then it escalates from there. But if you need to just do a quick check, you might try one of those toolbars available, and another one called A-Checker. You can Google any of those or write to me and I can give you the list.
And I just want to say really quickly, as a web developer, you can also use the Worldwide Web Consortium. They have a variety of accessibility tools that will essentially run through your web page and see what the results are as far as a disabled user. So they are also somebody to check out.
All right, well, thank you so much. That's all the time that we have. We had some really great questions, and I'm sorry for those that we didn't get to, but you can always email us. My email address is bienvenub, that's B as in boy, I-E-N as in Nancy, V-E-N-U-B, @arts.gov. And